So a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for coming. This evening is billed as being evening prayer plus a presentation. Evening prayer will be quite short because I'm going to read the collect for St. Hilda's Day. Eternal God, who made the Abbess Hilda to shine like a jewel in our land, and through her holiness and leadership blessed your church with new life and unity. Help us, like her, to yearn for the gospel of Christ and to reconcile those who are divided through him who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. We have on screen our own portrait of Hilda of Whitby. There are several portraits of Hilda of Whitby. They're all slightly different, but they all portray her as having a crozier in one hand and a very heavy Norman abbey in the other. So she was a formidable lady, or at least in the windows. She was a formidable lady anyway. But going back to where the Christianity that we're talking about came from, the President of the Republic of Ireland recently commented on the ongoing political debate. A knowledge and understanding of history is intrinsic to our shared citizenship. Without such knowledge is to be permanently burdened with a lack of perspective, empathy, and wisdom. To be without historical training, the careful and necessary capability to filter and critically interpret a variety of sources is to leave citizens desperately ill-equipped to confront a world in which information is increasingly disseminated without historical perspective or even regard for the truth. History is essential to understanding who we are today, and so it was with the history of the early church, when the British Isles were the powerhouse of evangelization, sending missionaries across northern Europe, preaching Christian doctrine and establishing churches after the Celtic model. And so the timeline, and it goes back to include Roman Britain, when in 314 there were British bishops at Constantine's gathering at Arles. So they were established in the Celtic mold before the Romans left in 410. Christianity reached Britain before the Romans departed, as I said, and the early British Church assimilated some of the folk religions of the Celts, the spirit world of the land, and the mysterious green man. The green man was a pagan symbol of rebirth every springtime, and the myth has been adopted by the early church to reflect Jesus' resurrection. The green man had supposed powers to penetrate closed places and people's thoughts. These, I guess, were ignored by the Celtic Christian church, but the green man lingers on, if not in the pub at the top of Putney Hill. Hilda of Whitby lived at a time of religious and political ferment, as the regional kings of Britain and the clergy fought many battles and proclaimed their doctrines to establish their authority. If you get the chance, read Melvyn Bragg's novel Credo, which captures the romance, the violence, and the religiosity of that time. Political alliances were made and sometimes broken by marrying off kings' daughters with the literate clergy serving as advisors and civil servants. Lives were often curtailed in battle. There was much treachery and disease, especially when the plague arrived in the 660s to kill off several emissaries who were coming to the synod at Whitby. And let's move down a bit. In 614, Hilda arrived as the great niece of Edwin, king of Northumbria, and later she was baptized. But let's go back to Columba. Columba was born in the aristocracy of Donegal, that's the top left-hand corner of the island of Ireland, to receive a Christian education and ordination to help to establish churches and monasteries in Ireland before leaving the Irish, who were called Scots at the time, to found the Abbey of Iona as the Northern European centre of learning and artistry. Columba, Commercial, the patron saint of Derry, is revered for his wisdom and particularly for his concern for women. As we heard from Margaret a couple of weeks ago, King Oswald of Northumbria, of Bernicia, called Aidan a disciple of Columba from his monastery on Lindisfarne to convert his kingdom to Celtic Christianity, and later, at the time of King Oswy, to join the Roman missionaries in East Anglia. Until we come to, whoops, I've gone back, done something wrong. Yeah?
You keep talking.
Keep talking.
Yeah. I'm going to have to open it again.
I've lost it.
Yeah. Here we are.
And I was looking for Hilda.
Yeah, keep going there.
No, that way.
That one?
No.
The picture. No, keep backwards.
Oh, there she is. Well, as I said, she's portrayed variously across Britain and further afield, holding a crozier and her monastery, which...
slideshow. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hilda was baptized in 627 with the rest of the people of Northumbria, and she was brought up in the Celtic traditions and liturgies of St. Columba. Hilda's spirituality developed during her exile, and she went into exile after King Edwin was killed in battle in 633, and she stayed with her sister's Christian royal family in East Anglia. Hilda was profoundly influenced by Aidan, following his spirituality of human warmth to the end of her life in 680. Hilda had been the abbess of two other monasteries before her great life work was accomplished at Struenshalle, that became Whitby, where she was planted and developed her concept of wholeness as the full realization of humanity, with authority over a large community of monks and nuns. A double monastery, this was most unusual, and particularly to have an abbess ruling over the monks. It was an early example of feminine competence and acceptance by the Celtic Church. Her authority must have included substantial administrative skills to enable her to run this double monastery, to house and feed the many nobles and clergy and their entourages on the cliff top 300 feet above the North Sea, which was originally the site of a Roman signal station, a lighthouse. Hilda's wholeness advocated the integration of the disparate elements of God-given human nature in work, study, worship, relationships with family and the environment, including the best use of wealth, recreation, time and energy, almost relevant to our lives, dare I say. Although she came from the Celtic traditions, Hilda came to see unity in diversity after the Roman Anschluss of the Great Synod, perceiving one Christian jewel within the Irish and Roman settings. And she reflected that a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. Now, where have we got to in the timeline? That's good. Yeah. So we are all told to remember Pope Gregory sending Augustine to England in 597, having seen angles he called angels in the slave market of Rome. And he was sent, that is, Augustine was sent, to convert King Ethelbert of the Jutish kingdom of Kent, and from there the wider Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of East Anglia. On becoming Archbishop of Canterbury, Augustine found himself at odds with the existing Celtic churches as he sought to unite the British Church with Rome. The Celtic clergy were originally reluctant to participate in a joint mission to the East Angles. And of course there were differences of doctrine. The supposed issues of doctrine that separated the Celtic from the Roman Church were tonsures, that is, how monks shaved their heads, and the Roman tonsure was in the middle of the crown of the head, and the Celtic tonsure was across the fringe. And of course, how one calculated the date of Easter, which was then, of course, and still is, the main Christian festival. It was a time when baptisms and ordinations were celebrated. However, the underlying issues was acknowledging or denying the ultimate authority of the Bishop of Rome. Whilst the rival British kings were keen to establish their own authority, they wanted the benefit of religious support. It was sad, but it had happened because he caught the plague. Archbishop Dues-Dedit of Canterbury died on the 14th of July, 663. And the presentation of a new primate may well have prompted the meeting at Whitby, as King Oswy of Northumberland regarded the appointment of a new archbishop as part of his patronage as the Regi Saxonum, king of all the English peoples. He may have demanded it, but he had to fight his way to get there. And so the main protagonists at the synod in 664 were King Oswy, King Wulfhere of Mercia, Bishop Colman, who was a Celtic-Irish bishop, Bishop Cedd of the East Saxons, who came from Celtic Lindisfarne, and Bishop Agilbert, a Roman Gallic from the See of Wessex. However, Agilbert had a poor command of English, so he appointed silver-tongued Wilfrid to promote the Roman cause. Notable absentees from the synod were Abbot Boisil of Melrose, who died of the plague, and Cuthbert, who just about survived it. Now, I should point out that Wilfrid has history. At the age of 19, he went to Rome, having spent time in Lyon along the way, where he stayed with the Bishop of Lyon, and he came back with a Roman tonsure and fully indoctrinated in the Roman doctrine. And having arrived at Ripon, he somehow evicted the Bishop of Ripon and the monks of the Ripon monastery. He must have been a formidable character. And so it was that Agilbert chose him to be his speaker. The early 8th century chronicler, the Venerable Bede, with the benefit of higher hearsay, quotes Bishop Wilfrid of Ripon. The Easter that we keep is the same as we have seen universally celebrated in Rome, where the apostles Peter and Paul lived, taught, suffered, and were buried. The only exceptions are these men and their accomplices in obstinacy, who in the remotest islands foolishly attempt to fight against the whole world. Well, we know where he stood. The Irish bishop came from the Celtic traditions. However, during the debates, he turned coat to Rome. Having heard Colman state that St. Peter held the keys to heaven, King Oswy concluded, "Since he is the doorkeeper, I will not contradict him. When I come to the gates of heaven, there may be no one to open them, because the one on your own showing holds the keys has turned his back on me." So, after the king had spoken, all those present signified their assent, gave up their imperfect rules, and readily accepted in their place those that they recognized to be better, that is, according to Bede, and of course according to Rome. At the same time as Strolshola, there was Caedmon, the first speaker and writer of English. He was a herdsman in the abbey at the time of Abbess Hilda, and is renowned still as the first English poet. Caedmon's hymn reflects his simple faith. Humbly now we honour heaven's kingdom's guardian, the architect's might and his mind plans, the goals of the glory Father. First he, the everlasting Lord, established earth's fearful foundations. Then he, the first scop, I assume scop means architect, hoisted heaven as a roof for the sons of men. Holy Creator, mankind's great maker. Then he, the ever-living Lord, afterwards made men, middle earth, Master Almighty. So, returning to St. Paul's on Wimbledon Park side, the history of the British Church is celebrated by Charles Kemp's splendid windows in this church, including, of course, the portrayal of Hilda in the sanctuary. We may wonder, where does this liberal C of E, St. Paul's, Wimbledon Park side, stand doctrinally in the aftermath of the 664 Whitby debates? Somers Clarke, this architect, was influenced by Sir Gilbert Scott, who was committed to the revival of Catholic sacraments. Somers Clarke built this church in the 14th century Gothic style, with red brick and white Portland stone caps and cornerstones. Perhaps he was also paying gentle homage to Hilda's Celtic upbringing. For just below the parapet, barely visible from the ground, the frieze of header bricks portrays the leafy face of the mystical green man. So there. Oh, is that the best picture? There he is. That's not actually our green man, because ours is in brick. All the way around. If you follow the line of the dip of the roof and above the windows, there are stretcher bricks and there are header bricks, but you can only see them when you're up there.
Oh, really?
So we'll do an excursion when it's light, okay? Yes. So before questions, I have a prayer by Janet Morley. God, our vision in our mother's womb, you formed us for your glory. As your servant Hilda shone like a jewel in the church, may we now delight to claim her wisdom and nurturing reflected in the women of this age. Amen. Now, I have several books loaned by Margaret. I won't bother to read them all. I have tried. But if you have questions, I will endeavour to answer them. I think her spirituality is something that needs to be explored, and Ray Simpson has written a book about Hilda's spirituality. So, anyone been to Whitby? Yeah. Yes. And what's it famous for now?
Great.
What's it famous for now? Jet? They mine black carboniferous hard stone from the cliffs as decoration, and they were all the while in Victorian times, and all sorts of brooches and the like, particularly after the death of Albert, were popular among the Victorian ladies. I don't think anyone wears jet now. They may fly them, but not wear them. Well, if you've had enough, I will serve you soup.
Can I just ask what happened to the Celtic, the abbeys and so on, in the Celtic tradition?
Well, her abbey was built in wood, and it must have been substantial to accommodate all those who came. But the ruins on the top of the cliff now, which are quite impressive, are Norman. And of course Henry VIII stripped it. But it's a dramatic sight. Oh, the people. Well, they did their own thing as far as I can make out. Rome was a long way away. It took 6 months to get there and back and whatever. And some followed the party line, and particularly in Ireland and in Scotland and Wales as well. There's umpteen different saints in Wales. It's hard to account for them. I've written about one couple. There were dozens of them, which don't appear anywhere in the Bible or in Rome or wherever. So clearly they kept them on. And dare I remark that the previous Archbishop of Canterbury claimed to be a Druid and followed Celtic practices. So you will find them at Stonehenge on various days, particularly at the summer solstice. But in Wales, Celtic practices continue. In poetry, of course. In doctrine, one wonders. But the Roman Church adopted all sorts of pagan practices and assimilated them into doctrine. Not least, of course, the winter solstice, which we'll be celebrating on the 25th of December, albeit that it's actually on the 21st. So there. Well, I invite you to come and share some soup. Can I turn this off? No.